As we get started, I am going to give you a brief bio of our speaker today. Migdalia was class of 1985, Williston, Northampton. She is currently a member of the Heads Visiting Council here at Williston. I've had the pleasure of getting to know her a little bit over the last year as I enter into my role here as Director of Alumni Engagement. I can say, honestly, the conversations are always energetic. We laugh. We have some great conversations, and I'm looking forward to taking a lot away from this, because we can all learn how to be more effective in our communications, and she's an expert. And so she will be leading us through this today, through our lunch seminar here. So her background: she's the newest member of the Federal Aviation Administration. Some of you know it as the FAA. It's the Office of Civil Rights, and she's in the role of Hispanic Employee Program Manager, and she's tasked with outreach and planning. So her background is both in the public and private sector, a wide range of experience in both. And then also she's a leadership coach, and she works with nonprofits, both public and private. And she is been a master trainer and motivational speaker. So when we had our first conversation, we talked, and she said, well, this is something I've done a bunch. It's called Can We Talk? And it's going to be focused on effective communication and how it involves a lot more than just speaking. So in this workshop, you're going to learn to enhance your communication skills and learn how to adapt in order to be more effective reaching your goals. So everyone crack open those notebooks, start taking some notes. It's going to be energetic and interactive. If you do have questions, please put them in the chat. Myself and Tammy will be monitoring the chat, and then we will propose those questions to Migdalia as we get rolling here. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it on over to Migdalia Gonzalez.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Tammy, for the invitation. Can you all give me a thumbs up that you can hear me clearly? It's not too loud. Good. Thank you very much. So yeah, I graduated in 1985, and I always tell folks that my 4 years at Williston was the most formative in my entire life, even college and even being a grown-up. What I learned at Williston had a profound impact on me. So much so that when I got out of school, even though my first degree is in design, I always minored in communication. Coming from the inner city and going to Williston, there was a big disconnect, right? It didn't make sense to me. I went from being part of everybody looked like me, everybody sounded like me, we all said water, right, instead of water. And then it went to no one looked like me. No one had the same accent on me. By the time I left Williston, I had the worst accent ever between being a New York City girl and then a New England girl, accent, right? Like I couldn't understand the first time someone said, are you going to the potty? I was like, I don't need to go to the bathroom, and they're like, no, the potty. I was like, am I missing something here? But understand that communication and making these mistakes happens in every language, right? If you know anything about the Latino culture, there are 21 different countries. And even from one country to the next, we may have different dialects or slangs that are used. Same thing here in the United States, right? If you're from the Northeast, or you're from Florida, or you're from Texas, or the Midwest, or California, we all have different dialects, different slang words that we use. The challenge is, as you grow up in your career path, you have to figure out how to deal with all these different kind of folks. And it's hard, right? Because we feel we're communicating correctly, but the reality is we're not, right? And we don't know what's going on. And so you all know who the caricature is on the screen. It's Joan Rivers, and she was known for being the most unpolitically or impolitically correct person ever. She just called it as it is, in her opinion. But that was her, right? That was her success. That was her key to her success. That's what made her who Joan Rivers was, right? But what do you want to be known for, right? Remember, you have less than 7 seconds to grab someone's attention. And that has come down since the 1980s, where you have more than 10 to 15 seconds. And that has a lot to do with technology, right? We are right now in a world where there are 6 different generations working at the same time, right? Between baby boomers and the millennials and the Generation Z's or X, it's vast, right? The amount of information that is available now in our fingertips, right? You can pick up your phone, all of you can Google or, do a search. We have information in abundance, right? The biggest challenge we have is that as Americans and as human beings, we only use 10% of our language. 10%, which is kind of sad, right? Because we stick in what we're comfortable with. And it's not sad, but it's a challenge because we are, as humans, we get into our comfort zone and we don't want to go past that. We're like, well, that's not my problem, that's their problem, right? You're also going to be faced with, you don't really like the person. And that's why in the bottom line, you see, even when you don't want to talk to somebody, right? You're going to have to. In corporate America, I've had incidences where people called me certain names, and at the end of the day, the CEO and the president could care less. They want you to finish the job. And if you don't finish the job, you'll both be fired, right? And so in the government's a little easier, but still, you still have to get the work done. So you really want to think about that process of how you communicate. Now, when we talk about communication, I'm a quotes person, and you'll see I'll bring some up. And why is it not moving now? Let's try that. There you go. This happens to be one of my favorite quotes. Wise men talk because they have to say something. Fools because they have to say something, right? So I didn't say that correctly. Wise men talk because they have something to say. Fools because they have something, they want to say something, right? And for growing up, my father wanted boys, so he got all girls. So he was like, listen, a real man doesn't talk unless he has something to say, right? And that's how we should all speak, right? We should all communicate with purpose, right? With the goal. What's the end result? Just to say something, to just talk because you want to be heard, that has to do with you personally, and that's your ego. That little green guy or woman or it, right? Let's be inclusive, right? You want to make sure that you check that little green guy, right? Because that little monster can make you say things and do things in a reactionary manner instead of being a preactive role, right? They tap into your emotions, and it has a lot to do, and this is neurology and psychology, and they'll tell you all about it. There's a little thing in the back of your brain called an amygdala, and it's a natural response that we have, right? It's about fight, flight, right? Either you freeze, you fight, or you flight, right? And so it's natural, and it's seconds that it occurs. So you have to learn how to manage that. And I always tell people, well, I was already on the negative when it came to trying to effectively communicate, and I'll blame it on my culture because we're passionate people. Latinos, we talk with our hands, even when I was taking classes and they're like, Migdalia, you have to stop using your hands. I was like, I don't know how to not do that. Like, and they would make me sit on my hands, so I thought I was going into a convulsion, because it was like, I can't talk without my hands. So you really want to think about how that your body language plays a part in that. And so when we talk about the objectives, we're going to establish what are some common grounds. How do you go about that? Identify some of the biggest barriers that you'll have. We'll also talk about nonverbal, paraverbal, not verbal, what does that look like? And then the most important key to your success about communicating is not communicating, but listening, right? Many of us, when someone is speaking to us, they will listen to respond right away. They're not listening to what the other person's saying. And what happens is that when you're communicating, we are bringing in all of the other stuff, all of our experiences with us, right? I call it a backpack. We're bringing it with us. So if you had a bad experience with someone, or let's say, let's see who's on the line here. I don't want to. Let's say Dale is meeting with me, and I met someone who looked just like Dale or is from where Dale comes from, and we had a really bad experience. I'm already looking at Dale sideways, right? And if you don't know what sideways means, is like, am I going to have an issue with this person? So you're already carrying that backpack with you. And Dale had nothing to do with it, right? He's just like, why is she looking at me this way when we didn't do anything, right? When I didn't do anything to her. So you really have to take, why is this moving so fast, right? You really want to look at what that looks like. And I am going to stop this because this is not this slide, the presentation that is so, I am so sorry. I don't know why I did this, but we'll keep it going, right? So I want to tell you that in your chat box, I'm going to ask you a question. What percentage or how much of communication is verbal versus nonverbal? So if you can use your chat box, let me know what you think about that. What do you think is the percentage between nonverbal, verbal, and your body language? What do you all think is the percentage? You could use your chat box, and we'll see here. Anybody? I know you all know. 60, 70, 30, 90%. Let's see. Who's the 90% here? Rogelio, yes, 90%, verbal 60, body language 40. Well, I'm going to tell you that Rogelio is the closest one. It is about 90% non-verbal. So I'll break it down for you. There is a professor at the University of California, Albert Mehrabian, and he's a subject matter expert on body language and how do you effectively communicate. And he said that 55% is nonverbal, meaning your body language, right? So how many of us have been in staff meetings or meetings with other people, or they're crossing their hands or they're rolling their eyes, right? Or if you have had kids or nieces and nephews, right? And their little attitude kicks in and they're like, right, huffing and puffing. Well, believe it or not, adults do it really well, right? And so 38% of that is vocal. And when we say vocal, we're talking about the tone in your voice. So if I were to say to Stacy, hey, Stacy, you better do this. I already have an attitude in my voice. But if I say, hey, Stacy, you think you could do this, right? Now I toned down the voice and I swapped out one of the words, right? So now it will disarm her because she's not going to be on the defensive because my tone didn't come out that way. And then 7% is only words, right? So we think that if we write up a speech and we read it, right, we're going to get the message across. Actually, if you sound like Charlie Brown, and I'm probably dating myself now, you will remember Charlie Brown's teacher was wah, 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 right? That is what will happen. Even if you hire the most prestigious speech writers in the world, if you do not have positive intent, and if you're not neutral in how you communicate, the speech is a dud. Right? If you think about the best speeches in the world, it's not so much about the words, but how it was delivered. So when you think about that, you need to understand that when it comes to communication, right, And these words here on the screen, I'm not going to read everything to you. If you can't read, that's a whole nother conversation, right? But it's an interchange of thoughts, right? It's between me and Terry. Oh God, you guys are gonna make me nervous. I have some of my class members on my team on the line, right? Or if it's Jenny, it doesn't matter. It matters how you hold yourself and how do you conduct yourself? What is it? What's the purpose, right? So it's about speech, it's about writing, it's all of these things in a package, right? Think of a cake. If you miss putting out, or if you leave out baking soda out of a cake recipe, it will not rise. Same concept. If when you are looking to deliver a speech, or if you're looking to develop a new team, right? It's about how do you reach out to them? You have to meet them where they're at, not about where you're at. You have to meet with them where they are at, because you're looking to build a bridge with them, right? So you really want to make sure that it happens. And so let's go on, right? So I mentioned the verbal and the paraverbal, and here I broke it down real easy, right? Verbal is what you're saying. These are the words you're using. Paraverbal is where everything else comes in, right? It's the non-word stuff. It's your body language. It's your tone. It's how you're saying it, right? Like I mentioned, if I said, how are you doing? How are you doing? Right? It all depends on the tone that you use in your voice. So you really want to make sure. So you really want to talk about how that tone is. Then you're talking about your due diligence, about finding out what your goals are and what their goals are, right? If you're in a negotiation, you have to know who you're dealing with. You have to do your research. You should always do that, right? And you could do that real common thing, ask questions, right? I live in the world of who, what, where, when, why, and how. Even in the agency, they laugh. They're like, we'll leave Migdalia for last because we know she has all the questions, right? And that's okay. I'm okay to be known for that, right? So you want to look at what the common barriers are. There are three major ones. One is language. And I'm not talking about Spanish, English only. I'm talking about where you're from, where your environment is, right? I remember going to Williston. I had never heard of lacrosse until I went to Williston. So I came from the Bronx, if you can't tell by my New York accent, right? Grew up in Westchester County after that, but I was like, what is lacrosse? You know, and then when I saw them doing it, I was like, that looks dangerous, right? that ball flying through the air. But it's about learning, right? I had to make the effort to learn. And please understand, when I got to Williston my first year, I will admit I had a chip on my shoulder because I felt like the oddball out, right? I was the only kid who had my name or a similar last name, right? As it grew up. And then even the Spanish teacher wasn't Spanish. Like I was at a loss. I didn't have anybody who I could relate to. You know, I will say that it was my friends, had I consider friends now, but it was my peers. It was my students who helped me overcome that. And, you know, I owe them, like, there are no ways to thank them for that, right? Because that has been my success story, because I get to understand and I make the effort of looking to build a bridge, right? Because you can't assume that someone understands where you're coming from, right? Culture, again, inner city versus suburbs, north versus south, right? Family of 4, family of 2, family of 15. It could be a whole lot of things in that culture barrier. And then language, location, right? Where are they from? How does that play a part of their culture and their language? Right? And so you really want to look at all these different languages, right? Yes, there are a lot. You also have to be mindful of people who do speak multiple languages. And it's funny, I was speaking to Jim Tice, one of the writers at Williston, and he asked me who was my favorite teacher at Williston. And I had to say Mr. Shaler, Mr. Al Shaler. And for those of you who have been there a long time, he was the coach for track and all that, but he was the English teacher, right? And this is true story. I'll never forget it. I was sitting in his class and he said, oh, all you kids think you know it all, but you guys don't have no idea what it is to speak multiple languages. And I looked at him, I was the only one, and he said, he goes, you think curse words in English are smart? I love this guy, man. I love Mr. Shaler. He goes, you guys don't have nothing on the Spanish language. He goes, now Spanish people, they know how to curse and insult you for real. And I was mortified, right? Because all I kept thinking is, I'm on a scholarship. They're going to kick me out of the school if I say a bad word, right? Nothing happened, obviously, but he did it. And it was his effort to help build a bridge with me and my peers. Okay, so he was practicing effective communication and how do you build that language, right? The culture barriers, right? Same words, different meaning, you know. We could say, let's see, what's a good word? There are so many words that we use in our language. So for instance, in Spanish, we don't say that the White House, we say the house is white. Right? So understand that if someone has was raised using a different language with a different language, should I say, they have to process, they have to translate what you're saying in order to effectively communicate or effectively respond, right? You want people to ask questions. You want to encourage that. I'm a big proponent of something called round robin. I always, when I'm hosting a meeting and I have a big big group of folks, I asked them, hey, so Susan, are you clear? Is there something I can clarify for you? Dom, how do you, are you okay? Is there something that you need me to clarify, right? I never assume. So I always take the time, and it is time. And I know we are short on time, all of us, right? Like I get up an hour early just so I can work without interruptions, right? Because of the phone calls, someone's asking us something, you got a big deal going on, the contract happened, or like an FAA case, we had a situation with the system went down and we got phone calls at 4 o'clock in the morning, breaking, it happens, right? But you have to make sure that you take that time out, right? Part of that, taking that time out, is before and after what I call the communication event, right? You have to do your pre-work. You have to find out who it is you're communicating with, what's going on, what's happening, what do they want? And it's simple, it's just ask questions, ask them. I'm telling you, it is very rare that someone will not tell you what they want. Very rare, right? So, and there's always a hidden agenda, right? If I'm negotiating with Kim and Kim and I are going back and forth, of course, Kim is going to want to get the best for her, just like I'm going to try to get the best for me. We, unfortunately, especially in our more mature generations, we have this win-lose concept, right? I have to win and you have to lose, and that's how we're going to be successful. That doesn't work anymore, right? It's about how do you build a bridge and how can we all win? How can we find a common ground that you succeed and you get the majority of what you want, and I succeed and get the majority of what I want? There's also during the conversation, right? During the event where you take notes. We are not going to remember everything. The hardest job to do is be a trainer for adults. Adults will only take away 10% of what you give them. Even if it's a whole day event, they will only take away 10%. It's only what registers. That's just how our brain works. Take notes, right? And then it's the follow-up. Make sure if you promise something that you're going to deliver it. If you can't deliver at the time you promise, let them know. Set the expectations. When you set the expectations of how you communicate with one another, you're going to have a better result, right? So remember that 38% that we mentioned about vocal, right? It's about the power of your voice. How do you work it out, right? People react to it. Subconsciously, they react to it, right? So if you have a low voice, some people are like, oh, they're very serious. Or if someone's very soft-spoken, they'd be like, oh, she must be very shy, Or someone who's loud, you're like, oh my God, can they just tone it down a little bit, Yeah, I've heard it. That's why I'm making in front of those exaggerated motions, right? Or if someone has a very high pitch, you know, they could seem anxious, they could seem agitated, or, you know, what's wrong with this person? Is she on drugs? Like, why is she talking that way? There's a reason behind it, right? What is behind that pitch of why they're speaking in that tone? And it's powerful, right? It really is. You get, you know, all I can think of right now is, you know, Martin Luther King, right? His speech at Washington, D.C. I have a dream. He didn't say it would have not been as impactful if he said, so I have a dream and I really would like somebody to, you're gonna be like, what's wrong with that guy, right? But because he came out straight from the back, he put his power and his passion behind it. So you felt it, right? If you don't think that pitch and the tone of your voice, your body naturally reacts to the pitch. You have no control over that. So when you're dealing with your kids or you're dealing with your partner or your spouse and, you know, you didn't throw out the garbage, you know, you're like, you know, all you want to do is you're going to throw it out, but you're probably going to do it with an attitude, you know, mumbling all the way, right? Again, you just literally created a conflict just by the tone of your voice. So you really want to be careful about that, right? One thing, and I've had to learn how to do it, is practicing lowering my tone, right? There have been instances where, you know, being in the White House, you know, and you're sitting there having a meeting and you're like, and I'm loud, right? And now I'm like, ooh, got to tone it down, right? How do we bring it down? Let me speak to the person directly, right? Believe it or not, even like this, it wouldn't work. But if I sit up, it's clear, right? So you really want to be mindful of that. And you want to be mindful of what the thoughts you're bringing in, right? You have in your head. Your body is a traitor. And even though you try to put on a, you know, a poker face, you know, all serious and all that, your body will say and do things that will be treason for you, right? If you think someone's a jerk, you're going to be like, you know, and they're reading you already. They are reading you already. So you really want to be mindful of that, right? Body language is powerful. So now you're like, oh my God, Migs, you telling me that communication is not just about words, but it's also about body language and the tone. Like, how am I supposed to do all this, right? I'm thinking of my daughter right now. That's why I was going like this, right? So you want to really be mindful of that. I mean, again, I'm going to go back to the most common thing that you see around: people crossing their hands and sucking their teeth or rolling their eyes. They could be it could just be as simple as someone being cold and that's why their arms are crossed. Or most people will take that or interpret that as as someone who's got an attitude about something, right? They were either forced to be in the meeting, they don't like you. Like, you're already, by reading someone else's body language, you're creating the stories to justify how you respond. And it's hard. I'm telling you, in our face, come on. If I went, that says a lot. And I didn't say one word, right? As a parent, you know, our kids tend to do that. And, you know, child abuse is a big thing. So just kidding. So you can't smack them up and be like, hey, but it's a big thing, right? For many cultures, it's a sign of disrespect. It's like, if you do this in some countries, it's disrespectful. It's not a good thing. It's a bad thing. Some countries do it this way, right? Or if you, culturally speaking, you know, we as Latinos, a lot of folks, French, Greek, Italian, we're huggers, right? This COVID thing put us into like serious withdrawal symptoms, right? Because we couldn't touch anybody. We're like, stay away. But ours is about hugging because we want you to know that we're here, like you're in, we're family, right? This is how we do things. For a lot of folks, they're like, don't touch me, right? I don't know you, don't do that. Has a lot to do with how people were raised. And so that goes back to that culture thing, right? So you really want to be mindful of it. And again, the presentation, I will send to Tammy. So if you want to, use it by all means, but these are just some of the gestures and some of their interpretations, right? If you go to India, right, they shake their heads a lot, right? And we think, is that yes or is that no? Like, what are you doing? Like, am I in? You're playing. If you ever played double dutch, you're in that position or that starting lineup at a race. You're like, am I in? Am I going in? Am I not going in? What does that mean? Right? So you have to be mindful. It's like right now with the big push about inclusive language, right? How do we do that? Instead of saying, hey, him, her, she, they, them, all of that, right? It's not about making it harder for us. It's really about how do we forcing us to really take the time to figure out how to effectively communicate with someone. Because the bottom line, it's all about communication. And how do you do that, right? I love this acronym. I use it often. I use it when I train college kids and high school students. Really, what's your star? What is your guiding light, right? What was the situation? What was your task? What were your actions, right? So what were your results? So you really want to keep that in mind when you're communicating. Like, what was it, right? That's part of your pre-work. What's going on? Who's involved? What's the goal? Is everybody on the same page about the goal, right? What do we have to do? Do we have to have meetings every month? Can we meet every quarter? What is it, right? So you want to keep doing that to make sure that you hold yourself accountable, but also hold everybody else accountable in the conversation. I think, do we have any questions? No, great. Good, all right. So establishing common ground is your key, right? You have to figure out. It's like, I'm sure you've all heard the phrase, put yourself in someone else's shoes. Figure out where they're coming from. One of the largest deals made in history by Buffett under Berkshire was when he purchased another company. And they closed the deal in 3 days. Now, the paperwork, of course, took forever, but they were able to, in 3 days, and not a little bit of money, this is billions, they were able to lock down the deal. Why? Because they all came and were upfront with the purpose and the goal. And they also knew that Warren Buffett was a man of his word, that the other person was a man of their word. So they all came up front. How do we make this happen for the benefit of everybody? And everybody won. The company was able to close a deal. They sold it. Warren Buffett helped expand Berkshire Hathaway. It happened. 3 days. Try negotiating with a 15-year-old daughter. Not happening, right? Why can't I wear that short crop top t-shirt? No, right? So it really is about doing your due diligence. Like I mentioned, post, during, and pre, right? So you really want to look at that, right? Always keep your eyes open. And one of the great techniques that I've used and that I was taught is to take folks out of their environment. When you go into a neutral environment that everybody's neutral, it's not my office, it's not their office, it's in the conference room downstairs or up in the next building or out over dinner. Everybody's neutral. It's a neutral ground. And so that helps to really build relationships because, it's like sports, right? Listen, I'm a New Yorker, Giants got hammered, but they went to Philly. Like, Philly fans are real, like just like New York fans, just like Boston fans, right? They always say when you're having to go to a game in someone else's territory, you're going uphill. right? It's a common thing. It's just how we process information. If we are where we are comfortable in, we feel we have backup, then we could come in hard. But if we're in a neutral environment, everybody has to play nice, right? Because there's no backup per se. So you really want to keep that in mind. I don't know what's going on, right? And again, I mentioned the who, what, where. I live in these questions, like who's involved, what's involved. If you don't ask these questions, then the other person is assuming you got everything, and you're assuming a whole different thing is happening. And when you come to the meet, nothing happened, right? Because no, that's not what I meant, right? So you really want to practice using those questions, right? And we all know what closed questions are. I'm not going to tell you what they are, you know, right? Anything I'm telling you today is stuff you probably have all heard, right? But as we grow up and as we get busy with our lives, we sometimes forget, right? And oh yeah, I could do that. I forgot about that. Or, oh, you know what? I should have done that before. So you really want to take the time to make sure that when you ask questions, you're searching for information, right? Think of yourself as a detective when you're in a case, right? You really want to find out who, what, where, when, why. Who was involved? What was it? Are you sure that happened? Was the car really blue or was it black? Because if you've ever seen or witnessed when they have on the news and one person is like, no, that car flew over the air. And the person who was right next to it said, well, the car hit, the blue car and then it went to the right car. Two different opinions. And they were both at the event, but because how we process information is different, two different stories. So you really want to keep doing those questions and clarify. Never assume. I never assume. I don't like to assume. I'm always, can you help me understand that? And I take ownership of that. And it's my style. That's what's comfortable for me, right? I never assume anything. That was the best lesson I learned at Williston, right? Just because they weren't Spanish like me or they didn't grow up in the city like me doesn't mean that they weren't great people, right? It's the same thing, same concept. It's the same concept in politics. It's the same concept in religion. What we don't know is what we fear. It is a natural reaction for us to think that way. So you really asking questions gets you out of that fear equation, out of using your emotions and figuring out how to move forward, right? And so you doing those questions, you really practice that listening. Now, when you ask a question, you should really ask a question and then be quiet. Don't interrupt. Don't ask questions, let the person respond. That's the only way you're going to get the information you need. But if I say to Roy, hey, Roy, you know what? What do you think about this? And Roy's about to, well, you know what? That's not what I think. That's wrong, right? So Roy is like, why did you ask me the question then? Real simple. So you really want to work on that. And it's kind of interesting dealing with leaders. A lot of leaders feel that once they get into a leadership position, they know everything. The reality is the best leaders in the world are those who continue to learn and expand their education and their knowledge. The minute you think you have nothing else to learn is the minute you fail as a leader. Whether that's the leader of your household, whether it's at work, whether it's in your community, whether it's, with your partners. If you think you are the end all be all, you're going to have a problem. And it's always going to come in confrontation. How many of us have been on a highway and we've seen a car speeding by us? How many of you, I bet you if you raise your hands, how many of you will say you've let out a few curse words, right? Or you've said, what a jerk. They're dangerous. That's dangerous speeding at 80 miles per hour. Then you go on the news the next morning and you hear, woman gave birth on the highway by Route 17 or exit 12. And you're like, ooh, and you look at the car and you're like, oh, that was me. Now you feel a little small because you're like, oh, I assumed that person was being reckless. I assumed that person was being dangerous. When in reality is the person driving the car was trying to get the woman to the hospital so they could give birth. right? So when you assume is where the problems occur. So you really want to be mindful of that, right? These 7 ways to listen, and you'll see, I'll give you some tips at the end. All of this comes from the Dale Carnegie School of Thought Process regarding communications. I happen to be certified by them, but they talk about really listening and avoiding interruptions, right? I mentioned the interruption piece already, right? The 10% talking. Like for me, I was like, what do you mean 10% talking? I could talk to dead people in the cemetery. Like just what do you mean? Right? It's really about letting the other person have their space to get out what they want to get out. Right? Everybody has to have the opportunity to express themselves and pitch their idea or pitch their thoughts or their opinions, right? It's all a matter of giving everyone space to effectively express how they feel, because then you can effectively figure out how to build a bridge with that person, right? Don't offer advice if they don't ask for it. Some of us suffer from that, right? Be aware of your environment, right? I came from corporate America. I came from a big bank. I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, which was very interesting for me coming from the city. It was the first time I had the what kind of literally someone asked me the inappropriate question was what kind of Mexican were you? I was like, who asked me that question? It's like I thought I was being punked. I was waiting for Ashton Kutcher to come out of the scenes, or I was like waiting for here in New York we have a show What Would You Do by John Quinones, who's a big anchorman here. I was just like, or what's the show where they used to pop up anyway? But you have to be mindful of where you're at, right? You may say a word that's very comfortable for you in the South. I'll give you a good word. When I moved to North Carolina, I was like, oh, we're having a picnic. And half of the room turned around and looked at me. And I was like, and I said, did I say something wrong? I said, because I said this word and you turned around. And they were like, we don't use that word here in the South. And so I was like, okay. And I was like, can you help clarify that for me? Like, what's the problem? And then they gave me the history of the word. I was like, oh, that's not what I meant at all, right? It's not a great word. It's a word that came about from the KKK and what they used to do to individuals. I was like, that's not what I meant. I'm so sorry. So I never say the word now. I say barbecue, right? We're going to have barbecue. But you have to be mindful of where you're at in order for things to work out. Now, AI, and I'll mention it briefly, AI is what we call appreciative inquiry, and I'm a trainer for them as well. And what we do about AI is sticking to the positive, right? You want to learn and understand who you're dealing with, because you can't put a circle into a square. It doesn't work, right? How many of you have worked for corporations? They're like, well, you have a skill gap. How about it's not a skill gap? Migdalia sucks at math. It's not good for her. Like, she's not good at it, but she could sell ice to an Eskimo. Let's put her in sales, not in accounting, right? So it's really about finding out what the skill set is instead of trying to force people into an opposite to something that they're not, right? And so you really want to talk about what happens if you don't effectively communicate. And please understand, 1 minute of poor communication can create a series. It is a snowball effect, because what happens is if I speak to, let's say, Steven, say, Steven, you know what? I really don't like Tammy. Tammy really didn't do anything to me, but because I didn't like the way she responded to me, and I'm assuming it's because she doesn't like me. Now, Steven is going to look at Tammy and be like, oh, I'm going to go with Migs. I'm not going to deal with you right now, Tammy. And Tammy's like, well, what happened? I don't understand. We were good until you spoke to Tammy. It becomes a snowball effect, because even though we are so-called adults, a lot of us love to gossip. And in Puerto Rico, we call it radio lips, right? That you go from one person to another person. And I never really understood it until I was doing my disaster work in Puerto Rico. And by the time I got to the third town, people were calling me by name. And I was like, she said, no, my cousin, and you held a fair 2 towns away, and my cousin called me. I was like, okay, but someone else can help you. She said, no, you were the person. I was just like, okay, right? So it works, it's real, right? And for a lot of cultures, that's very real, right? The Native American culture, same thing. Your boss, your chief says something, by the time, 30 minutes later, it's already spread out. And so you really have to be mindful of that, because the consequences of not effectively communicating are detrimental to a deal, to a business, to a relationship. And at the end of the day, we all have bad days. We all make mistakes. Own up, as my grandmother would say, pull up your big girl pants and apologize and move on. You have to take accountability of it. Avoiding it is not going to go away, right? You've heard me mention, and when I speak, I say I, because you can only control yourself. You can't say, hey, Stacy, what your idea is so dumb, because Stacy is going to get on the defensive right away. It's natural. When you come up with an idea or an opinion, it's yours, it's personal. You don't have to like it, but what you do have to do is figure out a way how to work with one another, right? And how to effectively communicate. And it's hard. Right now, 6 generations, I mentioned that before, 6 generations at the same time, right? Baby boomers are like, oh, these young whippersnappers here, they think they know everything, right? And then the younger generations are like, oh, the baby boomers, they think they've been here forever, that they know everything. Well, guess what? Just by the sheer fact that they've been alive longer than you have, yes, they know a lot more stuff than you. Just because you studied and got a bachelor's or a master's or 2 masters does not mean that you know more than someone who's been doing the job for 20 years. And so the funny thing is that their communication styles are very similar. And I know some people are like, what? So how many baby boomers we have in the room every Monday morning? Hey, how you doing? How's it going? How was the family? What you do on the weekends, right? It's a common thing. And what do our young whippersnappers do? They take pictures of their food everywhere they're at. They're oversharers. Baby boomers and millennials and gens, all oversharers. Like, I'm like, okay, so it's a great plate. Like, who cares? But that's how they express themselves, right? So you got to figure out how that works. So when it comes to communication, is extremely important because, and I'll put it as simple as possible. You have to be careful on the toes you step on, because they may be connected to something that you have to deal with in the future. You just never know, right? My grandmother would raise me to say, you treat everyone equally. I don't care if it's the janitor. I don't care if it's the president. Everyone is a human being, and everybody has their own feelings and experiences. So you really want to be mindful. And I'll tell you, even in the federal government, my employees who are in the lower pay bands, I rely on them more than I do my colleagues, because they make things happen. We get into the tower of leadership, and then we forget, right? Or if we're a deacon in a church or whatever the case is, I've been here longer than you. Okay, great. How can we work together? You just got to figure that out. And it's really about bridging creating that bridge of communication, right? It costs money when you don't communicate effectively. It's not just money, it's relationships. So you really have to be mindful of that. Now, here are the 6 of the Dale Carnegie's top effective communication tips that they share, and I'm sharing them with you, right? Give everybody the benefit of the doubt. Don't, everybody's going to gossip. I know when I'm about to meet someone new, I'll ask people, hey, do you know Dale? I mean, how is he to work with? Or, have you worked with him before? Or, if it's in a community setting, what has he done? What's going on? And you're going to hear pros and cons, right? Everybody's going to have an opinion. Everybody has one, right? But you have to take it with a grain of salt. Don't allow your process and how you deal with people be marred by someone else's opinions, right? Now, I love number 5, and I'll tell you why. When you are speaking with someone and you're having a negotiation or some type of communication event, words are powerful. So for instance, let's say I have Margaret on the line, right? And Margaret's like, she comes up with an idea and she's like, hey, Migdalia, but I'm going to say, you know what, Margaret, you don't even know what you're talking about. That doesn't even make sense. But if I change the words and say, you know what, Margaret, that's a great idea. Have you thought about how about if we did this? So I didn't shoot her down. I didn't hurt her feelings. I'm just saying, great idea. You acknowledge it, whether or not, you don't think it's the best idea, but you have to take it, right? The goal is to build a bridge. You're not lying. You're just saying, okay, thanks for the information. Have you thought about this? How about if we added this? Instead of saying, Margaret, you don't know what you're talking about. That is the worst idea ever. First thing, Margaret's going to shut down, and anybody else in the room is also going to shut down. No one is going to say anything because they're like, yeah, no, I'm not dealing with her. I don't want her. Right? So you really want to be mindful of that. It is 12:55. I want to leave you with one of my favorite quotes, and it's by Maya Angelou. And it says, if you're going to live, leave a legacy. Make a mark on the world that can't be erased. People are not going to remember you by your title. They're not going to remember you by your experiences. They're going to remember how you made them feel. And that's another part of one of her quotes, right? That's how they remember you by. They don't remember you by, oh, Migdalia was the director of so-and-so. She was an administrator this or they could care less. When you retire, when you're about to leave this place, what is it that you want to leave behind? Mine is, how can I help others get to their better place? How can I help these kids have the opportunities that I was afforded, right? My grandmother had the wisdom to know she's going to Williston. Believe it or not, my mother did not sign the paperwork for me to go to Williston. My mother could not see past that I was a 14-year-old girl, Catholic. I didn't leave the house until I got married. And now I was being sent away to Massachusetts. But my grandmother had the insights, and she was my mother's mother, so she pulled rank over everything. So she signed my paperwork. And her bottom line was, we are not financially able to offer this opportunity to her. Let's be supportive of her while she's there. And so I thank you all as colleagues from Williston, and Terry and Stacy, you could give me your real honest feedback later, as I'll tell you when I close my deals. If you like it and you're about to give me a rating, it's Migdalia Gonzalez. If you don't like it, it's Jennifer Lopez. Listen, I could dream, right? So let's work it out. Any questions?
That was incredible. Thank you so much. I just wanted to give everyone an opportunity to type some questions into the comment section if you'd like, whatever you'd have for Migdalia here. So that was a quick hour. I was riveted. That was amazing. And there's so many of these little nuggets that I think, to your point, remind you to really reinforce. We've been taught a lot of these lessons, but sometimes we don't always put them into action. So, that's a refreshing reminder for sure. And I'm sure you've been in some pretty difficult rooms in your past. So, that would be probably my question. And when was one scenario that you really use these communication methods effectively? You know, was there a specific situation or story where you really had to bridge the gap?
Yes. So prior to my career here with the FAA, I was with another agency and I did disaster work. And I was sent down to the South and I went to a real rural area. Like there was, you know, all kinds of stuff. But I was the one that had the money because I was the one that was writing checks to the community. And literally had someone just go off on the government and, you know, this government and that government and, you know, and I just sat and listened. I didn't say a word, even though I could feel the heat coming up. You know, I just took a moment and I said, you know, and I said, I'm sorry that you feel that way, but how can I help you? And he was so taken aback by the fact that I didn't respond in his in anger, because he was giving it to me. He called me, ooh, or he called me all kinds of stuff. But I just, you know, I took a moment and I just said, okay, and I'm sorry you feel that way. But you know, Mother Nature is not controlled by the federal government, even though some people think so, you know, but how can we help you anyway? How can I help you anyway? And he just looked at me. He goes, didn't you hear what I just said? I said, yes, sir. I said, but you don't have to like me. My job here is to help you. So how can I help you? Now, don't get me wrong. I did have to have what I call a coming to Jesus conversation when I got into my car, you know, to walk myself off the ledge, but it happens. You know, he was coming from a place where he lost everything. He lost his wife. He lost his house. He lost his car. He lost the farm. He lost everything. So I was the one in front of him that, you know, that he let it go on. And, you know, I couldn't take it personal because at the end of the day, I was going to deal with him for that short period. After that, I'm out. So it didn't really matter, but it's hard. And once I disarmed him and I didn't respond, I just listened. And all I said literally was, I'm sorry you feel that way, but how can I help you? And it turned the whole thing around. It got to the point where he showed up at the site, the what we call disaster recovery centers every day, because he was like, I just want to say thank you. And I just want to know, can you help this one? And he was bringing me more people over and over. Like every day he was bringing more people to me for me to help. So the goal was met, which is to get the services out to the public and get him housing and money and get him stable. And, you know, that was the end goal. And I'm glad I did it. He didn't have to like me.
Incredible. Well, thank you so much. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to enter them in the chat. I don't see any further questions here. The only thing I was going to ask you is, as a father to a teenage daughter, and you talked about communication, what would you say to the young kids that are kind of being raised? And obviously their communication methods are going to be different. They are taking photos of food that they're eating, and that's how they share experiences. So you have done this in front of kids. What is their response? What is their reaction? And what advice do you have to, I guess, the teenagers of the world growing up in this world?
Kids, they're special. So I did have a daughter and a son. I did lose my son, unfortunately. But you have to use the resources that are available to you. So I was mom. She really wasn't going to listen to me no matter what, because I was mom. You know, I was the dictator. And in my household, my kids will tell you, I told them, this is a dictatorship. This is not a democracy. I'm the boss. Take it or leave it. And, you know, that's what it was. So I was a little strict. However, when it came to my daughter, I used my sister as the mediator, because she thought my sister was the coolest. She was young. She did everything right. You know, she wore the coolest clothes. So anytime I needed to get a message across that I wasn't effectively doing it, I used my sister. You know, it was simple as, like, if I bought her a shirt, I knew if it came from me, she was never going to wear it, because mom doesn't know what I like to wear, right? But then I gave it to my sister. She was like, oh, look at what my aunt gave me. You know, don't take it personal. They're just trying to figure out their world, right? we want them to be like us or how we were raised, but the reality is they are their own individual persons, and they have their own thoughts. And this world right now there's a lot of information being pumped to them. The bullying is real. Kids are brutal. I mean, they're just like, but you really have to figure out what resources are available to them. Or one thing I used to do is write down all of your concerns, and I'm going to write down all of mine, and let's talk about it. The hardest thing was checking the emotions. Because, we want to protect them. We want them, but the reality is no matter what we tell them, they're still going to try to do stupid things.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. We have a couple just comments in the comment section here. Someone said all your points resonate. I too work
Hi, Christina.
federal government. It's Christina. Thank you and great job. So
thank you.
We also have Rogelio. We all have a duty as humans to reach out and connect with others, and sometimes we have to get out of our own comfort zone and bubble, which I think is definitely something that is critical, and something I was taught is you got to break out of that comfort zone.
Absolutely. Again, during one of the disaster works, I went out and I had to deal with a Native American tribe, and no one had success prior to me with the tribe. And I went in and I met with the tribal leader, and he said, you are the only one who knows, who's understanding and respectful. I did my due diligence, but also that's how I was raised, right? I never assume anything about anybody, but that was one of the most pivotal moments for me, where they invited me to a powwow to thank me for the work I did. I was able to get them some grants for some community centers that they wanted to build. But yeah, it's a wonderful feeling to know that you're making some type of headway. I feel it's my duty to give back, since I was given the opportunity to go to Williston and to really expand. And I remember the first day in the White House, and I went to one of the president's inaugural events, and I was in the bathroom and I was calling my mom. I was like, Mom, I'm in the White House. I'm at so-and-so's inaugural ball. And she just started crying, right? Because how would you have, little girl from the South Bronx, and now I was sitting in the White House having dinner and breaking bread. So it was pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Wow. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing your stories and your tips. And everyone is just, is saying awesome job, great presentation, and very powerful stuff. And hopefully we can get you to do some more things.
Soon as the book is done.
Soon as the book is done. There it is. Nice. When's the book going to be done? Soon?
Actually, it's in edit mode. It should go into print next month.
Okay. Well, we'll keep an eye out, and we'll stay in communication and get it all out to because the Willies got to be the first ones to buy it, right? We got to get that in the bookstore right away. So, well, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Thank you all for joining us. This is part of a continued series that we hope to run throughout the year. So stay tuned. Send us suggestions, thoughts, ideas. We'd love to hear from you. So thank you from Williston, and Migdalia, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And thank you for being a part of Williston.
It was awesome. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.